This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm the host, Andy Steele, and this is not just another episode. This is the episode that's airing on New Year's Eve, 2016. We're coming into within a few hours, or maybe we're already into the new year, depending on where you're located in the world. And this is the night that people get together and sing that song that goes da da da. I don't know the words to it. I guess people know the words to it. And people look at this time as a chance to quit smoking, lose weight, make resolutions. And we're going to do the same here on this show because there's a lot of stuff to get excited about in the new year. One of the things I'm excited about is we are getting a makeover on the 9/11 Freefall site. It's going to be the same web address. It's still going to be 911freefall.com. But when you go to it one day, it's just going to be completely different. You're going to say, oh my God, 9/11 Freefall has been updated. It looks professional now. It looks engaging, more exciting. And I can actually download MP3s right off of the site. Yeah, that's one of the changes that's coming. You're going to be able to download the MP3s of the show right off of the site. I've been having some trouble getting it up to the previous places that I've been using. Well, we're not going to have that anymore. You'll be able to go right to each show's page that's been designated for it and download it right onto your MP3 player or computer or whatever you listen to it on when you're hearing about the 9/11 science truth from me and all the great experts that I bring on this show and activists too who are spreading the word and executing this war of information. So look forward to that. Also, too, of course, as we talked about a few weeks ago when Ted Walter was here on the program, he's the Director of Strategy and Development for AE 9/11 Truth, we got a new Building 7 study coming out, a real Building 7 study coming out. It's going to be completely transparent, that you're going to have an opportunity to participate in and give your input. And it's being overseen by Dr. Leroy Halsey of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So I recommend highly that you find that episode with Ted Walter just a few weeks ago to hear more details about it, get the full context if this is the first time you're hearing of it. You can also go to WTC7evaluation.org to learn more about it too. And I didn't mention it before, but the guest tonight is Bruce Morgan, a great 9/11 Truth activist out there in the land of sunshine, sunny Florida. And he just did an outreach action at an event at the Liberty Bell Museum in Melbourne. And apparently he got some resistance from one of the organizers at this event. He'll be talking about that in tonight's interview. He had some success, too. The vice mayor of the city wanted the information, seemed very interested in that. So he'll be going into that as well. Before I play that interview for you, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that's 10 seconds.
My name is Leroy Halsey. I'm a forensic engineer and a professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Steel is a very fire-resistant material.
When a structure fails, my job is to figure out why. Over the next year, with a team of PhD students, I will be rebuilding World Trade Center Building 7.
How does floor 13 respond with respect to 12?
Using the same drawings that were used to build it originally, we will reconstruct it virtually. Our goal is to figure out why it collapsed late in the afternoon on September 11, 2001, even though it was not hit by an airplane. The investigation conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology concluded
what we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
Our investigation will evaluate the probability that this was the cause of the collapse. We are making this study open and transparent. Whether you are a physicist, engineer, architect, fire expert, or a specialist in another field, or just an ordinary citizen, we want your participation. We are making all of our data available online. Every aspect of our process regarding the modeling will be shared. And we will be giving regular updates from the lab as we continue our work. Join us in getting to the bottom of why World Trade Center 7 collapsed on September 11th, 2001.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Bruce Morgan is an activist from Florida. He's a member of AE 9/11 Truth's local action groups, and he's done a lot of great stuff to further the cause recently that we'll be talking about today. Bruce, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right, you are another first-time guest. We're getting a lot of these recently, and that's a good sign. It means we got a lot of people out there in the field doing the necessary work to push this issue forward. But since you are a first-time guest, I'm introducing you to the audience. Tell us more about yourself and your, in particular, your history of activism.
Okay. Actually, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. And initially, I was off the day of 9/11, and I was working out in the yard. My sister called me in. She said, "Bruce, you ought to see this on the news. A plane has hit the towers." And as I'm watching there, of course, the second plane supposedly hits. And I couldn't help but notice explosions, the plumes of explosions going off at the base of the towers that day as I watched it, even on television. And I also saw the top of the South Tower lean out at like 28 degrees or 23 degrees, I'm told. And I knew that their explanation of the pile driving, the building, that part should have fallen into the street because there was nothing directly above it to pulverize it. And then a few years later, of course, the free fall evidence of Building 7 came out. And then, of course, that was it. I had a fire in my belly, and I had to become active about it. And I made a big sign saying demolitions brought down the towers, and it was a sandwich board. And I hung it on my shoulders and walked out on US 1, and before long, a few people joined me. And I think that was back in 2005, 6, 2007, and 8, something like that. So I've been at it quite a while.
No, I was just going to say, so, I mean, you got that idea, and see, it's these simple things. I mean, it doesn't require a lot of money or finding a giant venue, paying some advertiser to sit there and war game a marketing strategy. All you did essentially was just get a sandwich board. You walk down the major highway, and you got people to follow you. I mean, this is the kind of things that people come up with that are very simple, small things done well every day that I just commend. And you were awake to this right away, it sounds like, back in 2006, 2005, when a lot of the public was still asleep to this issue, had never even heard of Building 7. I think that's the case for a lot of people now. I was asleep at that time still. When you first started doing something, did you get any resistance from people you knew? Were people concerned about you taking on this still very unknown and still very controversial issue?
Oh, my gosh. It was totally different back then. Everybody was so afraid. And to even be a conspiracy theorist, I got to give credit where credit is due. I was a mailman for the last 25 years out in the country, out west of Cocoa, Florida. And I was there when the anthrax attacks happened. So, I did my duty under duress, and it's something I can be proud of. But to find out it was such a massive lie that they foisted on us, I just had to do something. And I found out about 9/11 Truth in a curious way, and I've got to give credit where credit is due. It's the only print publication, a periodical, that talked about 9/11 truth as it was happening was the American Free Press. Are you familiar with it at all?
I'm not familiar with this. Please tell our audience.
Right. Well, they used to be called the Spotlight, and as I understand it, they were published right on Capitol Hill until just this year or last year. I think they moved out to Maryland. But the American Free Press, AmericanFreePress.net, and about 2003, I noticed these headlines on this paper that I delivered. Thank God somebody on my route got one, because I became a dedicated enthusiast. I mean, anybody who's willing to print the truth as it's happening. I remember Christopher Bolin was rolling out his great investigative articles back then, and it was really exciting. It was like the best detective story I've ever read, except it was unfolding in real life. And I read all of David Ray Griffin's books. I think he wrote about 10 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And then I was active in the rollout of Experts Speak Out, the great documentary that architects and engineers put out. I think, what was that, 2011 and 2012?
Yeah, the years actually escaped me. I want to say it's in that area, 2010, 2011, but that's a good question. I should know. I don't know the exact year, but you're in the right ballpark.
Right. So, I showed it 2 years in the libraries here in Melbourne, Florida. And the second time was a big success. The first year wasn't bad. We had about 25 people. And the second year we packed in about 55 and had some letters in the paper. Actually, I've had letters printed locally here now for about 3 or 4 years, maybe even going on 5 years. So it's easy to write a good letter, and it's not that easy, but it can be done, and they will print it if you make it logical and readable. So let's see, after 2013, I had a demonstration booth at the county courthouse. And I had got permission and set up my booth, and that was interesting. I had people thank me for being there that day in 2013. And let's see, last year I didn't do much, but this year it was good to get another letter published and be active at the Liberty Bell Museum. That was quite an experience.
Right, we're going to be talking about that. You talked about how different it was back in 2005 to 2013, where people are starting to thank you for your work. I'm finding that too. It was a very different climate, just a reaction of people to this topic. Even initially when I started waking up in 2006, and I just asked very reasonable questions out loud, commenting on the media's treatment of those individuals who were more openly asking these questions. Me even saying that they have reasonable questions prompted some people to get alarmed and say, oh, you're starting to sound like one of those conspiracy theorists. So a lot of the climate has changed from that time. What do you think, just personally, we can attribute that to? What has changed in our society in that time?
We've forgotten the fear factor. And they're trying. I don't know, all these supposed terrorist attacks, we're still not given any proof. We're supposed to just believe what the mainstream media is telling us about who's responsible. And, after you know about 9/11, if they can pull that off in plain sight on TV, come on, they can get away with just about anything. Do we really have to remind people that our government through the TV is lying to us?
Well, that's my point with all of this. I'm not following current events as closely as I used to when I was running my own news website, and that was my main focus. Now I'm so focused with 9/11 that I'll hear about things happening. I'm not completely in a bubble, but I don't study in depth or determine what's a lie and what's false. But what I do hold out is that the same people who are proposing certain reactionary responses to current events are the same people that were shoving the 9/11 official story down our throats, the same people that were telling their audience to close their ears to people like Richard Gage, Stephen Jones, all of the great experts and scientists out there, along with them, who are pointing to the obvious false narrative we've been given from NIST about what brought down Building 7 and the Twin Towers. So I can still remember that, these people have lied to me before, and I got to take what they say with a grain of salt now. That's what we do when we remind people in the midst of conversations about these current issues about Building 7 and the Twin Towers. When we ask them questions about it, you remind the audience who is hearing the question that these same politicians, media people, have lied to you before. The public needs to be vigilant now. And I think that's a great three-dimensional effect of our activism. Even if we never get a new investigation into 9/11, which I think if we keep at it, we will eventually. But even if we never do, we're still influencing the current mindset of the public. We're still directing people's intelligence to question. I think that's a good thing. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. We're because people aren't afraid so much now, in spite of these sporadic terror attacks that are happening. They're more capable to accept the possibility that there was a cover-up. And in fact, that's what I like to stress, is that, you start talking physics, it's true, a lot of people just don't get it. Fortunately for me, I got to tell you that I took a physics class in high school, and I barely passed, but I understand accelerated freefall. And thank goodness, because, 40 years later, it's reshaping my life. For sure.
Well, and I think, too, just the common sense factor. I mean, we got the scientific evidence. We got the 50-page Beyond Misinformation booklet that lays it all out. That if people want to dive into it, they can get into the science and the free fall acceleration, the visible explosions below the collapse line, the iron microspheres found in the dust, which are a product of a thermitic reaction. These are all obvious evidence, at the very least, justifying a new investigation. But even beyond that, just people's instinctive reaction to watching Building 7 come down, they know it's a controlled demolition. And I've had people kind of zing me for citing this, as if the whole argument relies on your instinctive feeling that it's a controlled demolition. It doesn't rely on that. That's what the science shows. But just watching it, there's something wrong. It's like being told that your neighbor committed suicide by shooting themselves repeatedly in the back of the head with a shotgun. That doesn't sound right. I don't think that story makes sense. You may need some confidence in your own intelligence to speak out and openly question it. Some people might stay quiet and be like, oh, well, okay, if they're dealing with a strong personality. But if you've got a strong personality and you're unafraid of telling the truth or admitting that something doesn't make sense to you, then that's kind of how the process gets started. That's how I think a lot of this got started, was people saying, that kind of looks like a controlled demolition. I think we ought to look at that again. Right,
and if we find out who had the foreknowledge and planted the explosives to make those buildings, or at least Building 7, come down the way it did, but guess what? It all does revolve around that. Who had the foreknowledge? And that's what we need to find out.
Right, and that's the thing is sometimes when we're speaking, we sort of say, when we prove to the world that it was a controlled demolition. We have proven it. So that's even an error in rhetoric when you say to prove it, because it's been proven. The case has been made. For anybody that doesn't want to close their mind to it, or anybody that is willing to face this and not just simply put it off and figure that somebody else is going to deal with it, the case has been made. Now the question we should be going to the next step with is saying, how could this have been done? But for the large general public, they still need to have somebody on the television screen in a suit, some official capacity, acknowledging it before they will buy it. I don't know what kind of flaw in psychology is going on there. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's pretty involved psychology that's going on, the manipulators behind the magic box of the television. But what people can understand is exclusion of evidence, and that they excluded the crucial evidence of 9/11 freefall, and it wasn't included in their considerations. Wait a minute. Hold it. That makes a fraudulent investigation for sure, to exclude evidence is to falsify, and falsification is evidence of fraud. So people can understand that. I don't see why we can't maybe shout that a little louder from the mountaintops, too.
Well, yeah, and it was only after they were forced to admit it by David Chandler, because he asked him a question about it. He submitted, I forgot what it's called, a request just for correction. It was submitted. They couldn't get away from it, so they included it, but they didn't really acknowledge the implications of the free fall. And of course, as I highlight every single week, it's almost like lighting a candle for this particular aspect of the 9/11 truth issue. But the fact that they left out critical parts of the building, all right, the shear studs on the girder that was allegedly pushed off its seat, the stiffener plates that would have prevented this thermal expansion from pushing the girder off of its seat. So if they're leaving out parts of the building that are there, at the very least, they should rerun the analysis. And I've even had people who disagree with me agree to that. So why aren't we having a new investigation? This is what the general 9/11 truth movement is asking. And when you actually get into how reasonable our argument is, it's really hard to turn away from it. It's really hard to deny it. But we still have denial, and we have people trying to play a smoke and mirrors game with us where they kind of divert our attention onto something else, focus on some new issue, and now we hear this argument about how it was 14 years ago. Who cares? I have people tell me that. People will agree with me, and they'll say, oh, that was 14 years ago, though. What do you care? Well, ask somebody who lost their children that day. Ask somebody, even if it wasn't related to 9/11. Let's say you have a parent out there. I've been watching these true crime shows. I'm visiting my mother for the Christmas holiday here, watching these true crime shows, and they have a story about an old couple who lost their child back in the 60s in an unsolved murder. All right, for them, it never finished. For them, the case was never closed. They never said, oh, that was 30, 40 years ago. They pursued that right until their very end, to the late 80s they lived to be. So, no, it's not over for those people who died, or rather I should say for their families. And so it's not over for us as Americans. And right now we still have policies being based off of 9/11. I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but no, it wasn't just 14 years ago. Those people live it every day.
Yeah, but they say 9/11 changed everything. It's hard not to go off on a tangent. And what's that infamous reply? 9/11 changed everything, and so will the truth. So we really need to keep at it for sure. I think we need to really start getting in their face. We need to speak it out vocally in the town square now. The time for writing is over. We need to voice it where it can't be ignored. The power of the spoken voice needs to come to our aid, I think, right about now.
You're absolutely right. You're a man of my own heart. That's the only way that they're going to face it. Nobody does anything they would rather not do unless they're afraid of something else. And I always have to qualify that I'm not talking about violence, because I'm always afraid that somebody who doesn't like us is going to twist my words into saying that. No, we're not talking about violence, but we are talking about pressure. We're talking about this issue not going away, that it's facing them, like an image in the mirror that people don't want to look at if they've done something wrong, and they can't look themselves in the mirror, that expression goes.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this to people that are higher up, big cheeses in government. I mean, just county level. And I have gotten some intelligent replies. This one fellow mentioned that, well, the idea is to keep it from coming out in our lifetime. And man, what a lousy way to run a country,
Well, you can do a lot if you don't care. I mean, and when I say don't care, obviously you care about the issue. That's why you do this. That's why people are involved. But when you don't care about the perceived social acceptance that they wave in front of you, that if you just kind of go along to get along, you'll be more accepted and people won't give you a funny look. But what I find is that this so-called lack of social acceptance, if you talk about these issues, is an illusion, because most people, when you start talking about this, will say they agree and have already heard about it, even if they're not actively trying to do something about it.
Right, and what I've discovered is that the friends I've made through the 9/11 Truth Movement have just been outstanding people. They've become the best friends in my life. And even to hear your interviewees the last couple of weeks, they seem like such fine Mikey and Samantha, such fine young people that are so full of optimism. And I'm looking forward to that meeting that they're planning over on the west coast of Florida. I look forward to attending that for sure, because now that I'm retired, it's the good life, and I'm going to really put a lot more energy into this 9/11 truth movement for sure.
Absolutely. Now, I want our audience to know about what you did out there recently at this museum, and I don't really have a lot of the details myself. I read an email about it, but right now it's just kind of a vague description. I know you did well and got a lot of people to pay attention to this issue just from your actions, and even if it was just for that afternoon. But I want you to set the story, tell our audience and myself what you did out there at this Liberty Museum.
Well, sure, I'd be glad to. It was an interesting day. I started to build a sign for the truck of my bed, and this was way back in oh my goodness, almost 8 years ago. And at the time I was working, and I never completed it. But about 3 months ago, I realized I had some time, and I completed this great sign using these banners from AE 9/11 Truth. One of them was the big one that you can use on the roadsides, and I wrapped that around one side of this truck bed platform, and then I wrapped a smaller one and a couple of banners about Building 7. I had them coated in, that coating. And anyway, they looked great. It looked great. The truck looked great. And I'm all prepared to use this truck for something, and I'm not sure what. And I knew that I had read in the paper that here in Brevard County, they've had 2 World Trade Center I-beams put on display, one at the Kennedy Space Center out in Cape Canaveral, and another one in Titusville. And I read in the paper on December 11th that they were going to put another one on display right here in Melbourne at the Liberty Bell Museum. So, golly, I thought, this is great. My own hometown, this is too good to not participate in. So I got a wingman to follow me, and he filmed me. We drove down to Vero Beach with the sign in the truck, and we had this big sign on the tailgate saying, "Expose the 9/11 cover-up," and a big sign on the door saying, "End the 9/11 media blackout." It looked great. So, okay, we got down to Vero Beach. The wind and the rain was against us, and we got there right on the nick of time, and we followed this first responder escort with a fire truck that had the 3-foot beam from the World Trade Center in it, and about 50 or 100 Vietnam veteran motorcycles behind him, right? So I'm right behind him, and we drove all the way up to Melbourne, and it was classic. It was truly classic. They were all on one side of the building, and I pulled around on the other. It was like me against them, and I parked in a perfect position where the people at the museum could read the truck. And they were all waiting around for the honor guard was there, and they were waiting for the cameraman from News Channel 13 to appear. So in the meantime, I started handing out literature, and now in hindsight, I realized that the people who took my literature didn't realize that it was 9/11 truth literature until I got about halfway through it, and I was going up to the Vietnam veteran motorcyclists that were all in a line to show their respect, and somebody yells out, "Don't take that literature, it's 9/11, it's conspiracy theory." And fortunately, I didn't get in a war of words with them, but as I walked around towards the museum, the director of the museum said to me, "We've put a lot of effort into this," and she's right. I read that it was like 6 years of paperwork to get this thing there. And she said, "We don't want you to mess it up." So I said, "Okay, I'll just stand over here," and I walked over out of the way. And I guess about that time the cameraman was showing up, and the director of the museum said to one of the women with my literature, she said, "Throw that away." And the look on the woman's face, she was astounded. She said, "But I haven't read it yet." And the museum director said, "And you're not going to read it either." And at that, wow, we were all astounded. So I walked up to the cameraman, and as I'm walking to him, one of the volunteers actually tries to keep me away from him. She puts her arm around him and waves me away and says, "No, no." Well, that was kind of like a joke to me, so I asked the cameraman if I could give him my card and some literature after the whole thing was over, and he said yes. Very nice of him. And at that point, so that was the big excitement. And then we waited until almost to the end of the event when the cameraman was leaving. And I failed to mention that before all this, we went to the firehouse, which is right next door, and they were the one that brought the steel beam to the museum. And about 1:30 in the afternoon, before all this happened, we knocked on the door, and I gave them the booklets, Beyond Misinformation, and some other handouts to a couple of firemen, and they weren't real impressed, but I thanked them for their service, told them I was going to be there later, and shook their hands, and they were good about it. I hope they still have them. They didn't throw them away, I hope, anyway, but it was real good that I went and did that beforehand, because it was quite a reaction from the officials. And when it was over and the cameraman went to leave, as he exited the building, the same woman and another man, he had a New York Police Department hat on, got between me and the cameraman, and the woman asked me, well, she told me, she said, "You can't speak to the cameraman. Please don't speak to the cameraman." And I said, "Well, of course, this has nothing to do with you. This is just between him and me." And we walked all the way out to his van, me arguing all the way. Finally, I got her to admit that it was public property. And when we got to the newsman's van, he graciously took my material and my card, including Beyond Misinformation, the booklet. And one of the fellows, I guess the fellow with the beer belly, he said, "We'll make sure this gets to the proper authorities." At that point, I had it, man. I just walked out of there. So I get back to my truck, and then the best thing happens. This man walks up and identifies himself as the vice mayor of Melbourne. And he said he'd be glad to take our literature and would make a point of reading it. And he gave me his card. So that was terrific. That was like the highlight of the whole thing and made it all worthwhile. And you can bet I'm going to contact him next month to see about a town hall presentation. I mean, what a foot in the door, right?
Absolutely. I'm impressed, too, because you handle it perfectly. The temptation is there when some woman decides to stick her nose in, or not even just some woman, anybody. I've seen this before, where people consider themselves the marshal of thought crime there, and that they're going to designate who you can talk to, who you can't talk to, even if it has nothing to do with them, even if you're not on their property, you're not even at their event anymore. I've seen it in the case of 9/11 Truth. I've seen it with other issues. Just people put this stuff up on YouTube, and you handled it perfectly. I think the adversarial relationship between those who are pushing for a new investigation and those who simply want to cover the tragedy of the event and focus on the official narrative aspect of it was a horrible thing that happened to us and we have to remember the people that died. I think that adversarial relationship was concocted by certain people in the media for whatever reason, I'm not going to speculate, to drive a wedge between people. And there doesn't need to be a wedge between them. I mean, all you're doing is trying to acknowledge this very real information that AE 9/11 Truth and others have brought forth and call for a new investigation into this horrible tragedy that took place. And you're remembering from your interaction, these people, that we are all on the same side here. We are not enemies of the press. We are not enemies of the police. We are not enemies of even the politicians who have to preside over this current situation that we now find ourselves in. We are all working together, and we're working for the betterment of America. That's something that we try to remember when we're dealing with partisan politics in the bigger stage. It's something we try to remember when we deal with issues of whether or not we should pass a certain piece of legislation. There are people on different sides of it, but we're all for America. We're all for doing the best that we can for our people. That's something we try to remember in those instances, but there's been a wedge driven between us and others by the media over the years and certain government officials claiming the moral authority on 9/11, claiming 9/11 for themselves, that they somehow stand for America and we somehow stand against it. We got to defeat those perceptions, and I think your actions right there help in that sense. We are not against the police, and the fact that this vice mayor took your information and said he's going to make a point of reading it, I think you said, shows just how reasonable our stance is and how we have more open-minded people out there than we think. This is something too. This woman, whoever she was, now there was probably an aspect in it that she had worked for all these years to put together this event and was probably paranoid about anything going off of the script in her mind. You didn't let her take over and decide for everybody else.
Well, she really made a fool of herself. I mean, when you think that she's the representative of the Liberty Bell Museum and telling people to throw away literature, that they were not to read it, and that I was not to talk to the newsman, this is absurd. This is outrageous. Does she realize what she represents? Obviously not. And even more dismaying is that one of the fellows on the board of the Liberty Bell Museum, he's also a councilman out in West Melbourne. He said that the 9/11 World Trade Center beam was now going to become the focus of their U.S. history, their angle for U.S. history education from the Liberty Bell Museum. I mean, why not the Liberty Bell being the central issue at the museum? Why does it have to suddenly change to a false narrative that's been foisted upon us that we're... it's just absurd. The poor children.
Well, it's interesting how 9/11 has become such a major focal point of modern history. You know, this used to be my complaint about teaching of U.S. history in a certain sense over the years, is that we focus so much on stuff that happened in the 1800s, which is important, but then you get to the end of the year and it's like they kind of play a game of catch-up. It's like, yeah, then we had a Korean War and the Vietnam War, lots of people died, and then Reagan, space race, fall of the Berlin Wall, and the end. You're going to have a final year test. Good luck. That's kind of the way it was always handled, and like all that stuff, though, that I just kind of breezed through, is actually applicable more now. And so in one sense, I agree with studying current events and focusing on how we have gotten to this point in the past couple of decades, going through the past couple of decades, I should say, and how we've gotten to this point in history. But since it is based on a false narrative, it's almost this religious zeal with which the establishment, when I say establishment, I don't want to sound like a typical internet radio podcaster by saying this. When I say that, I mean the conglomeration of politicians, media, using this event to push their own agendas, but how they have grasped onto this almost like some kind of religious event with which we need to base our current policies on.
Yeah, it's become a national myth. And they're not giving up, and neither are we.
In an email that I read about this, it mentioned that government officials were involved in putting on the event. Now, you might be talking about the local government officials, but is that accurate? And so in what capacity was the government involved in putting on the event?
Well, I don't think it was on public property. I think the museum is owned by a foundation. And I wouldn't be surprised if the people that we were talking to were volunteers or that were talking to us. It's probably about the way the situation is. But the only dignitaries that I'm aware of was an honor guard there from the fire station. So, yeah, I don't know if that's exactly accurate then. Government officials were there, but only in the capacity of the public, I suspect.
Well, that's good that you clarify that, because, you know, talking about the story, and I'm just speculating on this woman right now. She seems kind of interesting to me, this story of how this woman tried to control the entire situation and actually tried to put herself between you and another guy in your private conversation. And I like to focus on the dynamics of these interactions, because I think in a lot of cases is that you just have people who don't know what to do in a certain situation. A couple of years ago, me and Wayne Costi, he came down to my place and we went out and protested in front of Hillary Clinton speaking. We just had some signs up. But what was funny is that in this area, I don't think this college that she was speaking at had ever really dealt with anything like this before. And you could see the security guys pacing around nervously on their walkie-talkies, not knowing exactly what to do. Same thing when I did an anti-war protest a couple of years ago in front of the mall. The security people admitted to me, like, yeah, we don't know what to do in this circumstance where you're allowed to go or what you're supposed to do. So I think that if you're dealing with people who are inexperienced and dealing with any kind of protest or anything that goes off the beaten path of their mind of, you know, what they consider acceptable issues to talk about, they don't know what they're allowed to let you do, or they may feel that their authority is being threatened in some way, and that they need to squash it. So I'm saying all of this because, I don't know what was going on in this woman's head. She's really interesting to me, you can tell, in this story. But I just say this to the audience, is that there's a lot more going on in these interactions than just us versus the establishment here. You could be running into opposition, but the reasons for that opposition may have to do with factors that you don't even know about. So the important thing to remember is to be as friendly as you can and try to work with people as much as possible. Disarm them with kindness and talk to them about the science, and just simply assert, hey, we just want a new investigation. But if people don't feel that you are a threat to them in any way, and by threat I can mean just a threat in the sense that you're going to upset their day in some way, they're a lot more open to listen to you and also cooperate with you so that you do what you came there to do. What do you think about that?
Well, it was a great day. In all honesty, it couldn't have been choreographed ahead of time to come out better than it did. It was like the hand of Providence was with us, and I'm so grateful that it did all come together like that. And with the vice mayor, of course, taking our literature and me planning on getting in touch with him, it really couldn't have turned out better. And I would like to add that when I was standing there killing time, I looked down at my feet because I was waiting for the cameraman to come out at the end. And I noticed that the museum is dedicated to those who fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. And get this, Andrew, my father fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. And to tell you the truth, my father, that was a horrible battle. And talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. They used to call it shell shock or battlefield fatigue back then. But Pop, bless his heart, he's been dead for 25 years now, but he was so shook up with PTSD that our family was dysfunctional. And perhaps that's part of the reason why I am the way I am, because I wasn't until I was out of high school that I realized it was normal to hug and for parents to kiss each other. What post-traumatic stress disorder does to people is horrid. And these wars that we're basing on lies to do this to people is just unconscionable. And we need to press forward with 9/11 truth, and knowing that my father had dedicated his life so that people like me would have the freedom to speak out on issues like this that involve possible treason and high crimes against the world. 9/11 was a crime against the world. It was really quite touching. It was surreal. It was almost an element of surrealism to it.
Well, this is what people need to consider, and I say this to the future because I grew up with all of the anti-war stuff being put out, listening to people say, oh, war is terrible, war is a crime, all of this. But it didn't really stick with me in the lead up to Iraq. It took me having peers coming back and saying these things and actually getting into the details, for me to really grasp that, because it's not just about the people dying. Yes, the people dying, the soldiers dying is a horrible tragedy. And when you heard politicians talk about the stuff that they considered in the run-up on Iraq war, they kind of cited that, the soldiers dying, or some of them may have cited, people will lose limbs from this. But there's a whole other aspect to this Pandora's box being open that people don't consider. It's what war does to people when they come back, and that affects generations. Imagine some guy gets so traumatized by what he did in the war that it affects his behavior, it affects his interactions with his family, could lead to abuse to the child, and that child goes and carries that on into generations that follow also. So you are unleashing an entire box of demons when you go to war. You really want to consider long and hard whether or not you want to do it. And of course, when we get back to the issue that this show is focused on, the controlled demolitions of the towers and Twin Towers in Building 7 on 9/11, and the fact that it's all based on a lie just makes it even more heinous, in my view.
So that we would have war without ends for, endless war for endless peace? What a crock.
Well, no, war is war. When people say war is peace and all of these abstract things, this is basically 1984 that we're getting, the same kind of programming. So that's why we need to do as much as we can possibly do. And I hear so many people sitting around in these kind of impromptu think tanks, what's the big thing that we can do to waken our fellow man, to make a new 9/11 investigation happen overnight? And there is no one thing that we're going to be able to do. It doesn't work like that. What you have to do are these small things all the time and keep at it, keep punching, keep that resistance going. And like you making the sandwich board and walking down the highway and other people followed you, that's what I'm talking about. Do what is within your capacity to do, because when you start thinking that you need to do something big and grand, then you start deferring your responsibility to those who can make that thing happen. I can't make NBC News do a story on Building 7. At least at this point, I don't have that capacity. But what I can do is I can have people call into, the Washington Journal when we had that campaign going on. We can persuade the Boston Globe to run Richard's letter to the editor. We can do these small things that are going to mount up. We stick to what's within our power. If you are a housewife in Peoria, Illinois, you may not be able to do those things, but you can put a sign out on your front lawn. You can take your old pickup truck that you still got insurance on but you don't use very often, and you can put all sorts of 9/11 Truth messages on it. And I want to hear about this 9/11 Truth pickup truck that you have. How did you get the idea to do that? And tell us a little bit more about what is on it.
Well, like I say, I've got the big banner from AE 9/11 Truth, 2,000 architects and engineers demand a real investigation. And then I've got a smaller one on the other side with a couple of laminated, that was the word I was looking for, posters that AE 9/11 Truth has sent out over the years about Building 7, both of them. And on the back, expose the 9/11 cover-up. The war on terror is a fraud. Demand a new investigation. That's a winner, man. And then one of them was a sign I made years ago when we were out on the street. It says, "Beyond politics. Facts, evidence, and the laws of physics." But that one's a little too mild. I thought maybe I shouldn't put the 9/11 as the official 9/11 story as a big lie. I didn't want to rile people too bad. I had that one on a little bumper sticker, but not a big one. And we're just getting too old now. I'm 61, and to stand in the street with signs, well, it didn't amount to much. But it's real easy to park that truck on the corner and at the busiest intersection in town. And we plan on doing that, too, because we've got quite a few government contractors, Grumman, Lockheed, quite a few of them in this area, defense contractors. So I'm sure we'll be seeing more action with that 9/11 Truth truck in the future.
That's a great idea, and of course we have a person who did this with a UPS-style van up in Canada. I guess it's got TV screens on it, and I mean, it's these small things. There was somebody who sent me a picture. I can't remember who did it, but they essentially wrote a 9/11 Building 7 message in the dust on the back of their car. It might have been on the trunk or in the back window. I mean, right there, that costs nothing. That costs absolutely nothing to do that. And people see that, and it sticks in their mind. Being a human radio, having these kind of conversations like me and Bruce are having right now, but doing it out in the subway, doing it out in the restaurant. You don't want to be obnoxious in the volume of your voice, but, make it so that you are heard by the people around you having these conversations. I mean, these small things that you can do that require really hardly any effort. You can do them right on the spot. What are some of the other things that you and your colleagues out there in Florida have done over the years to get the information out?
Let's see. Some of the more interesting aspects. When we showed that Expert Speaks Out in 2012, we sent announcements to everybody. We flew away from President Obama down to the Governor Rick Scott, to all of the physics and chemistry teachers in the local high schools and junior high schools, including Florida Institute of Technology. We really blanketed the. I put a lot of effort into that one, just to get 55 people to show up. I guess but we were quite pleased. Other things we've done. Oh boy, we had a chance back in. The most people I guess we ever had standing out on the street was about 25 people. But once they had a meeting over at the college, the community college, and about 12 or 15 of us showed up, and but we didn't have a leader. And sometimes I feel like we'd have been so much more effective, the little bit that we did and we continue to do. But it's difficult when everybody's doing the grassroots thing on their own. It's kind of feeling our way,
Well, here's why I think local action groups can be effective, or how they can be effective, I should say, is that everybody's a leader in certain instances, and everybody's a follower in other instances. That's why I don't believe in these corporate tests they give you, or I guess they give them in schools too, to children to determine, is this person a leader or is this person a follower? Well, what context are you presenting these questions to them? Is it, somebody a leader when they're given an agenda by their bosses to make other employees follow suit? Or is somebody a leader when they go ahead and come up with a plan for something they themselves want to do and other people say, hey, that works, let's follow, all right? So the best thing to do if you're an individual and you say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if somebody did this type of thing? All right. Well, when you say that line about wouldn't it be cool, don't just defer it when that other voice comes in and says, oh, but you could never do that. All right. Assume that nobody else is going to do it and decide how you can make it happen yourself with your limited resources. So you say, hey, I want everybody to call, I'm just throwing stuff out there, call Rush Limbaugh on a particular day and bombard him with Building 7 questions. All right. So do the wargaming.
That's sure be part of a phone team. I'm ready for that.
Yeah, so what you do as the individual is you wargame it yourself, figure it out, and then if you need other people to help you out with it, give them the plan, and they will do that. And in that instance, you will be the leader. Now, maybe somebody in that group will come up with their own idea to do something similar or their own thing. They'll be inspired, and then they'll wargame it and figure it out and come up with a plan, and you help them out with it. And in that case, they're the leader. Just stick to what you know, stick to what you can do, and make it happen.
Exactly. Have a plan and follow the plan, and it'll all work out.
I think one of the biggest issues is confidence people lack now. They just don't think they themselves are that big of a deal and that they can't do anything. What do you say to that? What do you say to people who say, well, I could never make anything happen. I could never get people to follow me or listen to me on what needs to be done?
Well, that's definitely a follower. I know I can make a good leader myself, but fear is a factor. And, we're overcoming that, and I think we're learning how better to make our efforts more successful. And to speak out is what it's going to take. We've got this voice box. We still have the right of free communication, First Amendment rights, free speech. And we need to start shouting it from the rooftops louder and louder, get in their face, show up at more events, and get to know more people, because I'm finding out everybody's a great people in this movement of 9/11 Truth. They're wonderful folk.
Right, and part of it, too, is just being successful with something, and that emboldens you. That's why, if you have kids who don't have much experience doing certain projects or doing certain tasks, it's important to reinforce them the first time they do it and are successful and build that confidence up, and don't make a big deal of it if they fail, just it happens to everybody. Well, we got to do that with ourselves as adults here too. And also realizing that the sky is not going to fall on you if you do something. People have this perception that if they go and speak to their congressman, or if they call into a radio show and talk about this, or that somebody is listening, that they're going to be put on a list. All right, give me a break. Nobody is going to come after you. I've done things, and I'm okay. And if I'm on a list somewhere, well, that's fine. That list is a badge of honor. I'm on there with a lot of great patriots.
You got to have that attitude. I know I've been on lists all my life. You just learn to live with it.
So, Bruce, in our last minute or two, do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Keep the faith is what it's all about. And know that we're going to succeed in the end. Truth will overcome. There's, 3 things that cannot remain hidden for long: the earth, the moon, and the truth. Oh, the sun, the moon, and the truth. Excuse me.
That's absolutely right. And if we just keep at it, I have no doubt we're going to succeed in the end. We are succeeding. Just because Fox News isn't broadcasting it, and just because the New York Times isn't putting it on their front page, doesn't mean that we are not succeeding in our goal and moving closer towards it. Bruce Morgan, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andrew, for everything you're doing. It's been my pleasure.
This program's on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of the show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying, have a great week. Good luck.